So welcome back after the break, ख़वातीन और हज़रात। मेरी आवाज़ पता नहीं कहाँ जा रही है क्योंकि आज हमारी स्टूडियो में इतनी रौनक है, इतनी शान है भाई।
Because Gia Naseem is here now.
वाह, थर्ड पर्सन में अपना नाम लेती है। मैं ये नहीं कहती कि मैं आ गई हूँ, कहती है जिया नसीम।
Sometimes it's good to talk in the third person, you know? It kind of creeps people out. So.
सही है, वसीम शेख agree करता है इस बात से।
By the way, I love the look that we have going right now. You know, we have some Eastern and Western.
सही बात है, सब कुछ काला काला है। I don't know where I'm going with that, but we'll just.
Don't start. It's summertime.
But at this point, we're very excited because, of course, you know, Ramzan is halfway through, and we're really excited, looking forward to, of course, North America ki sabse badi chand raat. We've been talking so much about this, and this better live up to expectation.
Definitely.
I think it will.
I think it definitely will. I think if we're there, you know, it'll be even better.
अगर जिया नसीम वहाँ होंगी, तो चांद रात. चांद की जरूरत ही नहीं पड़ेगी।
चांद क्यों आएगा? मैं आ जाऊंगी ना तो फिर you don't need anything else.
वो छुप जाएगा बदली में, चांद भी शर्मा जाएगा, आपको देख के फूलों को पसीना आ जाएगा। अरे माही हाय हो, सही है।
ठीक है।
आपकी शान में मैंने गाने गा लिए। Of course, at this point now we're going to talk about some, speaking of course Bollywood, we're going to talk about some cinema at this point. Mosaic में भाई मुशायरे होने वाले हैं, musical concerts होने वाले हैं, theatre होने वाला है. So why can we forget one of our favorite film forms, art forms, film. Our favorite film forms, art. मैं क्या करूं, मुझे वर्बल डिस्लेक्सिया है।
आप बहुत ज़्यादा नर्वस हो रहे हैं?
मैं शायद हो रहा हूं।
Breathe.
क्योंकि हमारे स्टूडियो में मौजूद आज एक काफ़ी ख़ास मेहमान है, काफ़ी ख़ास हस्ती है। You know his film work, whether you know him or not, but I think इस इंटरव्यू के बाद अब उन्हें भी काफ़ी अच्छी तरह से जान जाएंगे। Whether or not you have heard Richie Mehta's name, you've definitely heard of his film work. You've probably heard of Amal, a brilliant film, and some films that he's working on at this point. But ये पर और बट का मिक्स है। But, you know, you have to know that he is someone who is a proud resident of Apna, Mississauga. And of course, you know, he never sort of hesitates to give back to the community. And that is why he is involved with the Mosaic Film Festival this time around.
That's right.
So, us mutalik baat karne ke liye, please welcome into our studios Richie Mehta. Richie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Very nice to have you here. Now, I just wanted to start. Now, you have a very extensive background in, you know, the arts. You've done some stuff in painting and sculpting, videography. So what is it that kind of intrigued your interest in filmmaking?
It was by design from the beginning. When I was in school here in Mississauga, they didn't have any film courses, and it was always my interest. But obviously they have art, they have drama, kind of the staples. And so I kind of started pursuing those avenues, and I said to myself, if I learn all the liberal arts, I'll use them all. They all get amalgamated in film.
Right.
Music was the only one I didn't have time for it. I just left, and I didn't have an aptitude for it.
Right.
But for drama, painting, sculpture, photography, I mean, film brings every liberal art together. So I studied them all, including into university. And then when I was ready, I started making movies. But that was.
So what was your first experience with celluloid altogether? Because I mean, you've mastered all these arts to a certain degree. What was your first brush with cinema?
Well, I wouldn't say I've mastered. I started addressing some of them.
That's why I threw in the certain degree.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Actual film, like I started in my 4th year of university at UTM. Right. In my 4th year, I started making short films. And at the time, it was 2001. That was when digital just started coming into play. So you just had mini DV, you just had Final Cut Pro, you know, now industry standards. And then I went to film school at Sheridan after, post-grad. And that was full on, like 35mm motion picture cameras, IMAX cameras, high definition. We started using all that stuff, 16mm. So I started shooting. I shot a film in my first year of film school. Right. I shot a film in every format, which was great. Right. So I really started to approach it cinematically.
Now, when we talk about you know, being someone who is coming from a South Asian background, probably an immigrant background within Mississauga, there's a certain value structure we adhere to, and unfortunately, a career in filmmaking does not usually fit well with that value structure. Was it a challenging choice to actually venture into this as a full-time career?
You know, that's probably the most interesting question I've ever been asked, and that value structure. It's interesting because I have a certain value structure which, yes, it probably came from the fact that it was an immigrant background, but then it also just came from my own observations and you know, like I don't drink. And in the film business, it's very difficult to not drink. Yes. But it's become a joke now, in a way. Right. So, and I ride with that. Right. So it's, again, you're at a networking event, you're in those environments, and it's free and it's fine, right? But for me, it's like, this is all means to an end. I love this environment.
Yes.
I love some of the people I work with. At the same time, I'm here because I'm trying to get the privilege to do my work. The work is the reason.
Yes.
And I always keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
So I would never go to a festival and socialize for the sake of it.
Yep.
That for me is, there's a reason we're there, to exchange ideas, to promote, to get ideas, but it's for that. And I always keep in mind what's the end and what's means to an end. And so it keeps it very straight.
So speaking a little bit about your previous work, your film Amal was very interesting, and it was filmed in India. So the majority of it that you actually did inside the rickshaw. How was that experience for you? It's been very difficult with all of the. Was it hard to get all of those people that kind of like to stand around and stare out of the scenes?
That was, I did a short film first before we did the feature film, Amal.
Okay.
So in the short film, I went with, I met a bunch of people, a lot of them that filmed me originally, and actors, cinematographers, a small crew, and some of my film school buddies. And we went down to India, there's 8 of us. We made a short film, which was Amal. And then we went back 2 years later and did a much bigger feature film. The techniques that we developed on a short, for instance, shooting with rickshaw inside, or the crowd, managing crowd, we used in the feature. So it's called Poor Man's Process, which is my company now is Poor Man's Productions. But the idea of Poor Man's Process is that you're cheating a lot of things. So for instance, in a rickshaw, there are ways to shoot it where you don't need big rigs. You can cheat it so that it looks like you're shooting with big rigs, but you're not. Like you're just a guy in the back with a little camera shooting somebody else in the back. Or you're stationary, you're just shaking the rickshaw and it looks like you're moving, but you're not. Things like that. Very simple stuff that you would never know. Crowds, that's a whole other
That must have been very difficult.
Well, yeah, to figure out how to work with actors so that when you go into the environment, if it's a train station or if it's on the streets, and you're basically performing in a way that you don't want to attract attention and hide the camera and things like that. So for instance, we had a visual effects artist who would erase people's eyeballs, change people's eyeballs. So if people walk by and look, you can actually cut their eyes out to look somewhere
amazing.
else.
I didn't even know they could do that.
For example. There's a lot of techniques you develop to use that environment because you can't control it. And I think it's foolish to try. And I think it's insensitive to try. It's like, that's not the point. We're going there because a part of it is capturing it and a part of it is making a statement.
Now, see, you mentioned 2 things which I found really interesting in this interview already. One is the fact that you speak about, the craft being the end, as opposed to sort of not just a process of the industry, which is really, it can suck you in. Secondly, you talk about sort of poor man's filmmaking, and your production company is called Poor Man Productions as well. How much of this is relevant or ironic now, considering that you do have a level of global acclaim attached to you post Amal and with the film work that you're doing right now?
I don't think it's ironic yet because it's still like it's hard. It's a hard living to make. Making these movies. It's one thing to garner the resources barely to make the project you want. It's another thing to make a comfortable living. And that's still a struggle and something that it's difficult to reconcile. So it's not that, I mean, the film, I'm working on a science fiction film now, as well as another film I just shot in India. That film we shot in India is 1/10 of the budget we had for Amal. So very, very small. The scale is bigger, but we figured out how to do things even more refined. Developed techniques, so we don't need as much money. And that's a different principle, a different governing principle, that the less you ask from people, the less you owe them. And the more chance that you have control over what you're doing and to make the statements you want to make.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the other projects that you're working on at the moment? A little bit more detail.
Sure, yeah. One of the films is called I'll Follow You Down. It's a science fiction film, which I started writing in film school 12 years ago. And I've been rewriting and rewriting thousands of times. And we just shot it last month. And again, it's kind of a bigger project than I've ever done before. But a real passion project, science fiction, fantasy, that's something else I really love. And I think actually a lot of people our age, of our culture, also really love it, especially here. So that's a very personal project to me. It's probably the most personal film I'll ever do because I started writing it when I was young, when my brain wasn't yet full formed.
It's a long process.
And interestingly enough, though, even though you claim it to be, such a personal project, it's also probably one of the most ambitious projects you've ever done in terms of its star cast and the names attached to it. Do you want to speak to that a little bit as well?
Sure, yeah. I mean, because it's a genre film, and because we're trying to take elements of a specific type of sci-fi that people I think who would come see it have seen all
Yes.
the films associated. So it's like, okay, well, we have to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
In order to do that, we have to have some names that
Absolutely.
people would know
Yeah.
to guide you through that.
Right.
So we do. We have a great cast. It's Haley Joel Osment from
Right.
Sixth Sense, Gillian Anderson from X-Files,
From X-Files.
Victor Garber, who's Alias and Titanic, and Rufus Sewell, who was a great actor from Dark City. He was just in Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Right.
So we got lucky with a really, really good cast, and that kind of made me up my game to a different level, for sure. But again, that's one side of my filmmaking, which I put my heart and soul into, and then the other side is still the cultural-based stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this other film, Siddharth, which I'm doing right now, which touches on child trafficking in India,
Right.
which is somewhat more issue-based, but at the same time, it's also about economy, difference in economies of the West and the East.
Now, I know we have to go for a commercial break really quickly, but I have to ask you one quick question before we do. You mentioned this film, I'll Follow You Down, being in the concept stage for about a decade, or the better half of it at least. When you've invested so much of your life and so much of your time into it, and then you go on to sort of produce it with names that sort of require you to up your game to a certain degree as well, how nerve-wracking is it to take that first shot? Because something that's been in your mind for a decade is now going to be made permanent on celluloid or whatever the medium is at this point. Is it difficult?
It's strange. It's very strange just to think about something for 10, 12 years,
Right.
and then you go and shoot it, and it's done in 20 minutes.
Yep.
Right.
It's very, very weird. And especially when we're working with actors of that caliber, who bring so much from their experience,
Yep.
that there were lots of times creatively they would challenge me and say, well, what about this?
Yes.
And I'm like, well, I've been thinking about it this way for a decade.
Right.
Right.
And now you're saying this, and you're right.
Yeah.
And it's better.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
we build on it and make new, and it was awesome. It's so invigorating to look at something one way for 1/3 of your life,
Right.
and then have somebody else who you admire so much
True.
come in and with the expertise and say, what about this?
The whole work just basically comes to life then.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's better. It's better than I could have done.
I kind of feel as if, filmmaking is kind of like being pregnant, but for many more years than just 9 months. And you see the final product and you go, it's here.
12 years is a long time to be pregnant.
It's a 12-year pregnancy.
That's true. And I always say, like, you're right, I guess it is. But I always say the best thing this kid can ever end up being is at a discount bin in Walmart. The best you can do in your life. That's like, we've hit it. The Holy Grail.
You've gotten there.
Yeah.
Like you've come, and I'm pretty sure it's going to do a lot more before it actually ends up in the discount bin. Maybe 10 years down the line, we'll see it in the discount bin at some point.
Yeah.
But बहुत सारी बातें और करनी है. Of course, you touched on your cultural aspect, which means we're going to talk about the Mosaic Film Festival as well. So ये सारी बातें जो करनी है, वो हम सब करेंगे. एक छोटी सी ब्रेक के बाद तो आप कहीं न जाइएगा. हम अभी गए और अभी वापस आए.